for today. We're going to talk about diabetic foot infections, diabetic foot care, and wounds especially. I do a ton of diabetic related foot amputations, toes, partial feet, quite a lot. It's a very frustrating part of my practice, but it's critical to save lives. But I would do a lot to prevent that from happening. And there's a lot that can be done, should be done. And if people would do it, I'd be out of business, and wouldn't that be fantastic? So, diabetic feet. The problem that we run into is that, diabetics have a blood sugar problem. They have a hard time controlling their blood sugar. So every time blood sugar spikes, a lot of things go wrong. But in my world, in the foot and ankle world, what we notice the most is three things. Number one, king of everything, is people start to lose feeling. Every time blood sugars are high, the nerves that come from the back, from the spine all the way to the feet, are the longest nerves in the body. And because of that distance, the blood sugars cause problems. They cause damage throughout the nerve, and it makes it much more difficult for the nerve to function. Eventually, that damage can mount to the point where the nerve doesn't work at all, and you go from burning, tingling, numbness to occasional pain and fire type feelings down to complete numbness and then nothing. And so you can be walking along, stub your toe, break your foot in half, and not even know it, literally. But what happens more often than not is people will catch their toe on something. They'll have an area that takes a lot of pressure where they get a callus, usually under the fifth or first metatarsal around the heel or somewhere else, anywhere where a bone sticks out prominently. And a callus will form. The callus will get so big that it goes from protecting people to actually becoming a liability. If the callus gets really big, it's like having a rock literally taped to the skin. It'll rub and move around so much that it'll blister underneath the skin and create a wound. If you can catch it early enough, it's sterile, and you can treat the wound and usually get it to heal up quickly. But oftentimes people wait too long, that blister gets infected, and then we're really in trouble, and so on. So the biggest issue then is that numb feeling, the lack of feeling. It's called neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy, diabetic peripheral neuropathy. There's a lot of names for it, but it's the general lack of feeling in the feet, where neuropathy gets so bad that it puts my patients at risk. So if you have that problem combined with really bad blood flow, with diabetics, the arteries all the way throughout the body become calcified, and you get much less blood flow to the feet. By the time blood gets to the foot anyway, it has a lot less oxygen than when it started. So for the average person, the skin on the feet heals more slowly. For example, I take stitches out of the foot at 2 weeks. A facial laceration is more like a week or even a few days before it's healed. So things heal poorly in the feet anyway. You throw on top of that bad blood supply, a wound that you didn't know was there. Now you have a wound that won't heal. On top of that, the third big issue that happens with my diabetics is their immune system is not what it should be. So once an infection starts, their immune system can't fight. It can't fight as well as it should. And if an infection gets going, it is off to the races, a race between the surgeon and the infection to see who gets it out first. So that's, in a nutshell, the problem with my diabetics. So what to look out for? Prominent bones, shoes that are too short, anything that can cause friction. So I often see wounds on the top of the knuckles, especially if you have a hammer toe and the toes are buckled on top of the foot. Tips of toes, especially if they curve down. If you grip the ground when you walk, which is really common. If you notice people getting calluses on the tips of their toes, they're a big risk for getting infections. The metatarsal heads, any one of those can stick out and be prominent. Just genetically, maybe they stick out. That's a big deal. Heel pressure, a lot of heel pressure can cause issues. And if they're in bed, if they're an elderly patient or whatnot, or a paraplegic, if you're in bed or in a wheelchair, anything that presses a long time or touches a long time, that skin dies within hours, and you can have a wound show up because of that. So diabetic wounds, they are a major cost to the healthcare system around the world. I can't tell you how many of my patients have been hospitalized again and again and again because of infections, amputations, Often it culminates in a below the knee amputation where you end up with a prosthetic. You'd think it was over at that point, but a lot of times the stump breaks down inside the prosthetic and they have wounds there. I deal with this every day, and if I could have my diabetic patients do a few things, it would change so much and save people so much time and effort and money. So rule number one, get your blood sugars under control. I can repeat that a million times. If your blood sugars are out of control, you lose feeling, you can't heal wounds, and infections get going much faster than they would otherwise. I see, generally speaking, blood sugars over 150, wounds just slow down for a lot of people. They just won't heal. As soon as my diabetics get that blood sugar down on average below 150, wounds start to heal and they do much better. Your primary care doctor or diabetic specialist is probably going to shoot for lower than that, and that's fantastic, but that's just an idea. If you're above 150 consistently, you very more likely are going to have a lot of issues with your feet. So blood sugars are critical. Beyond that, we're talking about maintenance. If you are a person that gets calluses, and even if you're not, you should be seeing a podiatrist routinely. If you get calluses, you need to be seeing them monthly or every other month to get those calluses taken care of or looked at or monitored. It's amazing how many times I've caught people who thought there was nothing wrong. You know, they pull off one shoe and sock saying, I've got an issue here, but say, oh, my other foot's fine. I'll have them pull off the other shoe and sock, and lo and behold, there's something they didn't even know was happening there that's critical. That if we had gone another few days or weeks, they were going to lose part of their foot. So monitoring their foot is really important. I tell my patients, get those shoes and socks off, check them 2 or 3 times a day, morning and night. Make sure you're looking for calluses, blisters, red spots, warm spots, anything that looks like the skin's broken down or about to break down. See your podiatrist immediately. I say podiatrist in this case and not foot and ankle orthopedic surgeon or anyone else, because nobody gets training on diabetic limb salvage like a podiatrist. They did a study out of Duke several years ago that showed that if you're a diabetic with a foot wound, if you have a podiatrist on your team, just on your team, not even if you're seeing him routinely, your chances of a major amputation go down by 30 to 40%, depending on your age group and so on. So it's not that podiatrists walk on water and they can solve all issues, but they know what they're talking about and they can prevent a lot of simple things that lead to amputations quite frequently. So monitoring your feet all the time. If you can't see the bottom of your feet or you can't look between your toes because of back issues or whatever, get someone in your life who can and pay them well to do it, because it may very well save your foot. If you're all alone and there's nothing else you can do, put a mirror on the foot, look at the reflection, see if you can see anything going on, and bare minimum, make routine appointments to your podiatrist so he can take a look. Before you put shoes on in the morning or in the afternoon or whatever, take them up. Take the shoes, dump them out, put your hand in there, make sure there's nothing stuck through the sole, up through the shoe. Make sure there's nothing in it. I can't tell you how many of my patients have worn a watch around or a golf ball or even worse all day, and by the time they've walked around on that thing for a few hours, you can imagine the carnage that happens. So check the shoes, always make sure they're free of any problems. Wear good socks, always wear socks. I don't care what kind of sock you wear. If you wear socks, that solves half the problem. But a couple of tips there. Wool, smart wool, merino wool, that kind of thing will wick moisture away from the skin and help prevent blisters. I like white in general because you'll see blood. If you got a blister or a wound, you'll notice the blood faster if they're white. Check them frequently. Change the socks frequently. If you do that, if you wear a good solid tennis shoe that's got a sole that only bends at the toes and from here back is tough and strong. I'm always using this shoe as an example because it's fantastic. This is made by Apex. I don't really care the brand as long as it's strong. So I like shoes that have a mesh upper that are really soft on top. Most running shoes will fit the bill. A sole that's really, really stiff and strong. And then inside the shoe, we need a lot of cushion. Usually foam, EVA foam, some kind of thick cushioned insert is going to help prevent you from getting blisters. If all of my diabetics would always wear shoes, always wear socks, and check their feet 3 times a day, I'd probably be out of a job. And wouldn't that be amazing? If you have a problem, get to your podiatrist quick. Infections, when they set in, all they need is a few hours to a few days before they start to get to the point where they're going to cost you a toe or a foot or worse, your life. So don't give infections a chance to get going. Other things to think about as a diabetic, don't ever go barefoot outside or anywhere. I can't tell you how many times I've taken x-rays of a foot, a diabetic foot, and seen syringes, the insulin needles, excuse me, the insulin needles stuck in a foot and they don't even know it. Probably been there for months. The needle get in there, they don't know it's in there, and the skin seals up over the top and it's wandering around inside the foot. Sounds like I'm making it up, but this is true. I think my record holder was 6 needles in their foot. Those can cause issues, they can get infections, so you have to be careful with your diabetic paraphernalia, but they often get dropped in carpet, you don't know it, you pick it up with your bare foot, and we're in trouble. So if you wear shoes all the time and you're checking them all the time, you're going to solve a lot of problems. Never check bath water with your feet. Make sure you test it with your hand. Don't jump in hot water without testing it quickly with your hand first. Routine appointments with your diabetic specialist, checking those blood sugars, checking your A1C. If you don't know what an A1C is, that's your 3-month average of your blood sugars. Numbers run between 5 and 14 and extremely high. I think you're shooting for 6.25. That number keeps getting adjusted, but somewhere in that ballpark is what you're looking for. You get into the 7s and 8s and 9s, you're going to have problems. It's just a matter of time. So tight blood sugar control and working closely with your primary care doctor and your podiatrist probably is going to add years to your life and quality to your life, because you'll still have your feet on your body. If you are young, if you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, take your parents seriously. Take your doctors seriously. A lot of times patients will bring their kids in who aren't taking the diagnosis of diabetes seriously, and I can't tell you how many people I know in their 20s who I am amputating toes, telling them they're in big trouble, and they're already in big trouble with their kidneys and other issues throughout their body. So blood sugars, do it, it's worth it. I know it's incredibly annoying and it's almost impossible to do. For someone who's not diabetic, I can't imagine what it's like having to check blood sugars all the time. But they have constant monitoring devices now that can be swapped out once a week that talk to your smartphone. There's a lot of great tools out there to help get those diabetic blood sugars under control. So do it. And find a podiatrist, find somebody you like in your area, get to know them well. If you have never had foot problems, see them at least once a year. Kind of review things with them, make sure they get to know you. And ask them, if they don't already do it, to do baseline x-rays. So there's something that's a little more rare with diabetics that they need to be aware of. It's called Charcot Neuroarthropathy. Or just remember Charcot, C-H-A-R-C-O-T. It's a French word for a French doctor who described it. I mentioned before about neuropathy. Imagine walking around, you do a little bit too much, maybe your shoe's broken down or you go barefoot, and let's say you stub your toe or you break a metatarsal. No big deal, right? The average person's going to feel that, go to the ER, they get put in a big boot, they heal up in a couple of months and you're good to go. Well, if you can't feel that, you keep walking, you transfer a lot of pressure from one metatarsal to the next because it's broken and floating there. Well, the next guy snaps and then the next guy, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen feet literally broken in half. Sometimes it happens along the joint lines, sometimes it's along the metatarsals, sometimes it's up through here through the tarsal and midfoot, rear foot. But if that foot breaks in half, goes without saying, that's a huge deal. The problem is once that foot destabilizes, now you get what's called a rocker bottom foot, where the foot's shaped like a banana. You get so much pressure on the bottom of that foot that breaks down into a wound within minutes, hours. It's very, very simple. If you break down, you get an infection, and infection enters the mid part of your foot and those bones, it becomes very hard to deal with. It becomes hard to deal with because you can't just remove that bone without further destabilizing the foot. If the foot breaks in half or there's fractures along there or some dislocation, that can be saved. I have had many people come to my office and say, "Doc, I'm here for a second opinion. I went to see the orthopedic surgeon down the road. They told me the only thing they can do with my Charcot foot is amputation. I have no infection, it's just broken. Can't we do something? And I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can save that. So don't accept that you're in for an amputation. Now, if it's infected and there's infection up into the bone, yes, you're in big trouble and you may lose your foot. But if it's just broken, if it's just dislocated, even if that foot is broken and it's incredibly two pieces and it's dislocated, we can save that foot. We've done it time and time again, and it is very possible to salvage. It's a big deal. It's a big surgery, and I'll show you some pictures of just the crazy amount of hardware we have to put in there to save the foot, but it can be done. My point here is that you need to be aware that if your foot starts to get red, swollen, warm, even if it doesn't hurt, you need to get to an ER immediately. You need to demand an x-ray, and you need to demand that you see a foot surgeon. I don't care if it's podiatry, orthopedics, whatever. Get somebody to look at that x-ray that knows what they're talking about, and if they tell you, well, it looks like a Charcot fracture, find someone who knows what they're doing to deal with that and take care of it quickly. You need to get off the foot, you need to baby it and protect it very quickly, or this turns into a nightmare. The scenario I see played out time and time again is that people get a red hot swollen foot, so they go to an Instacare or ER. The doc's in a hurry, they don't take it seriously, they don't take an x-ray, and they just look at it and say, oh, you just have an infection. Here's some antibiotics, see how it goes for a few days to a few weeks, see you then, and go from there. Well, if the foot's breaking in half and you keep walking on it, that's going to keep breaking in half, and the antibiotics aren't going to do you any good. And the inevitable complete dislocation or fracture lines form, and we're in big trouble. So I always ask for an x-ray and get in to see your podiatrist quickly. I tell my diabetics, summing up, if you have a blister, if you have a wound, if you have redness, swelling, anything changes with your foot, I don't care how small it is, I'll never make fun of you for coming in for a tiny little hangnail that seems like nothing, because I have caught what looked like nothing that turned out it was a big deal. So come in, get checked out. You know, it's worth your time, it's worth your money. You may very well have just saved a toe or your foot or worse. So that's it for basic diabetic foot care. As far as neuropathy goes, we'll get into this more in another episode, but there are things you can do to reverse diabetic foot neuropathy. Number one, of course, get your blood sugars under control. There are drugs that you can take to cover the pain of neuropathy, but there's also supplements that have been studied very well. Here in Utah, at the University of Utah, they did a good study on the vitamin B supplements and vitamin D. There's certain companies out there. One is called Methanex, the other one's called Nerve Reverse. Both have good combinations of all these vitamins and supplements into one pill. Makes it easy to take. And they've shown that they've been able to reverse the damage done to nerves. They can increase nerve growth. There's certain tests you can do out there, nerve conduction studies, or one of my favorites is a pseudo scan, SUDO scan, which shows how the nerves are functioning and what level they're functioning at. I have a lot of patients on these supplements that get the nerves tested initially, go a year on these supplements, and they show 20 to 30% improvement sometimes on their nerve function. The goal, of course, is to get them to the point where the nerves function well enough to tell you something's happening before something big happens, so we can do something about it instead of being completely numb and getting in trouble quickly. So those are options. We'll get into that more later, but that's something to consider. The other portion of monitoring that we need to talk about is blood flow to the feet. Simply seeing a podiatrist, having him take your pulses, and checking what's called cap refill can be useful. Cap refill is where you squeeze the toes and you see how long it takes to pink up. That tells you how fast the microvasculature is refilling with blood. If it comes back within 3 seconds and pinks up, fantastic. If it takes longer than that, you may have blockages along the vascular path that need to be opened up. There's a test called Co-Brachial index, ABIs. It's where we put blood pressure cuffs on your ankle and your arms, and we compare the difference in pressure. And that can tell you a lot as to how well blood is getting down to the foot, and if there's a blockage somewhere along the leg that a vascular surgeon could reopen, either with balloon or putting a stent in there. Either way, revascularizing the foot and hopefully helping heal wounds that won't heal, or preventing wounds from happening, and further nerve damage. So that's something to consider. But that's what a good podiatrist is going to do. He's going to check your pulses. He's going to check your nerve function, either with a little filament called a Sens-Weinstein, where he can check to see if you can feel different pressures, or doing a pseudo scan, and then checking your x-rays from time to time to make sure your arch is maintaining, that things aren't settling, and that a Charcot-like event is not happening. It's all about monitoring. If you can monitor closely, you're going to prevent problems. If you keep your blood sugars intact, you're going to avoid a whole bunch of problems. And mainly, the main deal here is to make good friends with your local podiatrist and make sure he knows you well, or she, and get to know them, be in there frequently, and you're going to avoid the majority of problems I see. When I'm on call at the major hospitals around here, the call I get most frequently is, I have a diabetic, they're out of control blood sugars, and they have had a foot wound for a month or two and have done nothing about it. Now it's infected. That person's in big trouble. If only they had kept their blood sugars in control, if only they'd been seeing their podiatrist routinely, and if only when they got a foot wound, if they had seen somebody as quick as they possibly can, 99% of the time the problems would have been manageable before we have to go do surgery and try to save their foot from major amputations. So I am purposely trying to scare the crap out of somebody out there, because we're going to save a foot or a life if they would just listen to what I'm saying. So if you have a loved one that's a diabetic and they're not paying attention, have them watch this video. I'm going to get a little graphic with the photos. Hopefully it's not too much. But this is the real deal. It's something I deal with all the time, and we hope for the best always. Keep in mind, we are doing these lectures for Operation Underground Railroad. This is the amazing group of people that run around the world trying to save kids from sex trafficking rings. They save these kids, they put them into aftercare that's amazing. This whole process costs quite a lot of money, so please go to O.U.R rescue.com. It's Operation Underground Railroad. Make a donation and you will make a difference. Thanks. Bye.